Welcome to Life by Design, episode 323. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm not joined today by my colleague, Dr. Crayshaw Jug. If you're new to the show or the podcast, we are the creators of Life by Design with 25 plus certified locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. And on today's episode, we're covering a topic that you've probably asked yourself before. Is diet soda bad or good for your kids? I know that, growing up, it was especially growing up in the 80s, it was a time where, artificial sweeteners were becoming more popular. And, soft drinks and, replacing sugar with these new invented sweeteners was really, really popular. It was the thing to do in the sense. And I remember my mom or parents and their friends growing up always having, I can't remember the names of these drinks, whether it was, Coke Zero or Pepsi Zero. But the idea is that if we take out the amount of sugar in these drinks and replace it with something that is sugar-free, but still is the same level or more sweetness or in the same range, that somehow we're going to replace the number of calories. And that was the question. And so in this particular research study, I thought it was interesting. There's a couple flaws, more than a couple flaws with the study, so I think that's important to recognize. But nonetheless, this study was specifically looking at kids. So if we look at our kids, and there's a lot of reasons for this, I think that when you look at the rate at which children are becoming more obese, it's quite extreme. In fact, it's not something that is obviously by design, if you will. I just don't think that it's a normal situation for 2 to 19-year-olds to necessarily be overweight or obese. But at the last set of data, you're looking at about one third of our kids, if we use the age range 2 to 19, is considered overweight to obese. So those are really, really big numbers. They're also increasing, so it's not something that is static or going in the correct direction. It's actually going in the wrong direction. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And there's obviously extreme health outcomes that come along with this. So increased rates of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and we know now that if you extend that into adulthood, you're looking at the effects of diabetes on longevity. And I can't remember where exactly I read this, but, recently looking at, I believe it was either type 2 diabetes or just overweight. Actually, that's what it was. It was published by, I believe, the Canadian Cancer Society, looking at weight gain or being overweight as being the second highest preventable cause of cancer next to tobacco use. So, we're looking at obesity and being overweight as really being an incredible health risk, not just to, the way that we feel, but incredible health risk in the sense of living shorter lives. So when we look at, our children going from, one third to being overweight or obese and knowing that number is probably going to continue, we need to start looking at solutions. And we're going to get into today about whether diet soda is good or bad. I don't think that question is really the solution. It's an interesting topic, and it's one that we'll uncover here from a Life by Design perspective. But in reality, the solution is really getting back to probably something that revolves more around self-esteem and the development of, our mindset, the development around how we think about our health. I think that's really more of a fundamental approach and something that parents can do, start to challenge. Why is it that we eat this way? Why is it that this is how we look at exercise? There's something psychologically that needs to be addressed in order to get your head on right before you start taking these action steps. Because I think one of the mistakes that people make, and this goes for our children because we're the ones telling them generally what to eat, and we're giving them really permission. If you take a look at our younger children, whether it be our ages, we're talking about 2 to 19 here, but let's say we're talking ages 2 to 5 or 6, it's not as if we're giving them free rein to just, at least I hope, free rein to go to the fridge and grab whatever's in there. Now, the secondary piece of that is what is in there should be foods that you would endorse eating for yourself, for your family. So It would be great if they could just grab what they needed and know that whatever's in that fridge is appropriate and approved. But that's not the case. So, if you're still transitioning, we're making these decisions for them. I think it's just something we need to consider as a more fundamental approach to our health. Because just making a change here, so for example, swapping out, regular soda to diet soda or artificial sweeteners, is that really going to have an effect? Well, based on this research, although the findings are mixed in some of the research, I think the overall message here is supported, and that's that swapping out, I'll give you the end of the story here first, swapping out sodas and sugary drinks for artificial sweeteners, diet sodas, and so on, does not reduce the chance of obesity or overweight. And so, I think it goes against what we would naturally think, and instinctually you would just assume, okay, sugar's the problem. We take sugar out, we put an artificial sweetener in. But, these artificial sweeteners have also had mixed results in some of the research studies, looking at, do they have other health effects in terms of negative health effects? And I know that, you've probably heard people talk about, aspartame, and does it have effects? Is it a neurotoxin? So, I think that, and I'm not going to get into that on today's show. I don't think that's the point. People have their opinions, but let's just say from a research perspective, the message is mixed on whether those have negative health outcomes or not. So I think, again, if we look into this study specifically, we're looking at kids, and this was a pretty good sized group, really. When the study was done, it was 7,026 kids and what they drank on a given day. So obviously there's some inherent flaws here. We're looking at what people drank on a single day. We're also not looking at the other food that was taken in during that time. So they're looking at their total calories, and they're looking at what was consumed or drank on those days. And so they split it into three categories. You've got the low-calorie sweetened beverages. So that'd be your things like a diet soda, artificially sweetened juices, sports drinks, teas that would be sweetened. Then you have sugary beverages, so sugar-sweetened sodas, sugar-sweetened sports drinks, fruit drinks, dairy as well. And you might not include dairy, I think, when you think of sugar, but the sugar consumption from just milk is extremely high. And again, the milk sugar or lactose is a sugar. And then sugar intake from non-dairy milks. And then the final category, which really turned out to be the best category, and it just makes sense that that's probably the most likely category that would be the best for you, is guess what? It's water. So they looked at each child's total calorie intake and then the sugars over a 24-hour period. And essentially what they found, if we're going to just give you a synopsis of the information here without going too deep, basically, if you drank sugary beverages or even low-calorie sugar, artificially sweetened beverages, you took in more calories than you did if you just had water. And I don't think that's rocket science, that you have a sugar intake from the drink if you're drinking the sugar ones. But I think the part that was surprising to the researchers, and maybe surprising to you if you're listening, is the group who had low-calorie drinks, who had artificial sweeteners, still took in a significant amount of calories more than the group who drank water. And so where are these calories coming from? And I think that's the question that needs to be asked. And that's not what is answered in this study, but this is the question that needs to be brought up is, does, affecting the brain, affecting the way that we're processing sweetness and our perception of sweetness, does it affect, our basically digestive system, our brains? Does it affect what our desire, I guess is the word I'm looking for, what our desire is? Does it affect our satiety? Are we full? Are we getting signaled that we're hungrier? And I think, we talk about this at Eat by Design, we talk about this in really our Eat by Design workshops, that the body and the feedback mechanisms between digestion and the brain that are telling you if you have consumed enough and if you're still going to be hungry, it's not just the amount of calories that go in. It really is, are we getting nutrition? And I think if we make it simple, are we getting nutrition? So, I often use the analogy between eating a steak or a piece of quality protein and then eating cupcakes. and I'll ask my group, how many cupcakes can you eat? And of course, people generally are not honest about the amount of cupcakes they can eat, because I know I can eat a lot of cupcakes. And when I say a lot, I'm just, to be honest, I'm sure if you put 10 cupcakes in front of me, I don't think I'd have a problem eating 10 cupcakes. So 10 cupcakes, as amazing as that would probably be, maybe 3,000 calories. And maybe I'm being generous, maybe more. But if I were to have a quality piece of protein, let's say a pretty good sized piece of protein, maybe we're talking 600, 700 calories, a big steak or a big piece of chicken. How many of those could I eat? Well, again, I could eat a lot, but a big piece of steak, I'm sure I'm going to be pretty full as I'm approaching 600, 700, 1,000 calories of protein. That's a lot. But I could still eat 3,000 plus proteins of cupcakes. But again, to be honest, I could probably just keep eating more. I don't think by the time I got through my 10, I'm going to be totally full. So why is it that I can keep going and going and going when I'm at 3,000, 4,000 calories of cupcakes, but when I'm consuming the quality protein, I'm going to get full? It's obviously not just the stomach volume. And I think we assume, okay, well, that's a lot of food, I'm going to be full. That's not the case. There's signaling that happens between, your digestive system and your brain, letting you know, okay, I'm full. And so why is that? And I think without getting into the science of it, really this idea that taking in more nutrients is telling the body that we're getting nutrition, which is the whole point. We're getting nutrition. And when I get nutrition, my brain says I'm full. If I'm not getting nutrition, although there may be food volume that's filling my belly, I'm still getting messages saying, no nutrition, keep going, no nutrition. And then there's the whole other side of the hyperpalatability of food. So when you're combining things like sugar and fat and salt, things that don't really, as far as I know, exist in nature with that combination of flavors, it really changes the way that your brain works, and it changes the messaging system that tells you you're full. So in the case with sweeteners and sugary drinks and water, we get back to this. I think it's important to recognize that there's a pitfall here, and the pitfall is really going back to our mindset and our approach. It's psychological. It's this idea. It's that we're not thinking about what is fulfilling the nutrient requirements of the body for our kids or for ourselves. It's really the switch that we've talked about so many times on this show, that we really need to be focused on building, not breaking down. We're looking at muscle gain and fueling our body for nutrition versus fat loss and weight loss. Because when we're looking at it from the first perspective, we're thinking about and asking the right questions. What foods are going to fulfill my body's nutrient requirements? What's going to give me the best fuel for my body to rebuild, to be healthy, to function, right? Different than just, I need to lose 10 pounds. And so when we look at it from that perspective, we start doing things like cutting calories. We start looking at how can we get a lower calorie version of this really bad food that I love. So, how can I get a gluten-free, low-calorie pasta? How can I get gluten-free, low-calorie cupcakes? And that's generally how people start to think. And while you may have a short-term effect, and there may be a short-term benefit where you step on the scale and you see a few pounds, my experience is those don't work. And the research is the same. If we look at, again, there's a 2017 study that was talked about in this consumer report that I'll put the article in the show notes at lifebydesign.com/podcast, guys. You can find today's episode and you'll see the link there. But in a 2017 review of 37 studies of people who used low-calorie sweeteners, they were actually more likely to gain weight and increase their BMI and waist circumference. They were also more likely to suffer from high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. And I think that's probably pretty shocking to people, right? We're so used to being marketed to, and I think it's just culturally accepted that low-calorie sweeteners are better for you than sugar. And people make this change and they think that they're doing the right thing, but based on this 2017 review, and we're talking 37 studies, so the robustness of this result is big. It's not just, we found this study, it's got 10 people in it. We're talking about thousands of people here taking and using low-calorie artificial sweeteners, more likely, listen to what I said, more likely to gain weight, increase body mass index, and waist circumference, more likely to suffer from high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. So I think that we're asking the wrong questions. How do I lose weight? Is the artificial sweetener, it's got to be better than the sugar. If you start flipping it and you ask this other question, which is, what do I need to do to maximize my health? Your answer, although the first thing that pops in your mind, you might think lose weight. I'm telling you, that's not the answer. The answer is to build muscle, to get stronger, to become more fit, to function better, to sleep in a more quality way, to fuel our body, to drink enough water, to be happy. You think about it, we're addressing our health and our well-being from the affirmative. How do we build, grow, and move forward, maximizing our body's potential and our life potential in that sense, versus how do we move away? How do we retract? How do we lose weight? How do we lose fat? How do we take in less? You can hear that the action steps in these two different questions are vitally different, and they're going to lead to different results. And it's really interesting, and I think it's great that we're starting to see the research supporting this. So what's the take home? No question. The best drink is just water for people of all ages. Who would have thought? Of course, your kids don't probably love drinking water, although I would say that my kids generally are fine with water. And I think, again, it goes back to that's what we give them. That's the drink they get. Now, we do soda water. We'll sometimes sweeten that with, especially here at Charlie's Cafe, we've got a couple cane sugar essential oil mixes. So we'll sweeten that up with that. It's a couple grams of sugar per cup. We do love the kombucha. So we've got kombucha on tap here at the Life by Design Center. And again, our kids love that as well. So there's ways around this that you can do it without adding an artificial sweetener that are still focused on getting kids what they need, which is water. And then, of course, focusing on the other steps, which is giving our body fuel. And that's the take home for today, guys, is think fuel, not weight loss and fat loss. Think nutrients, not low sugar artificial sweeteners, and give your kids the opportunity to fulfill their body versus trying to take away the things that you think are going to be bad for them. All right. So go to the show notes, lifebydesign.com/podcast. Check out today's episode, and thank you, as always, for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.